Welcome to Brew Crime, the show where we drink brews, talk about crime, conspiracy, or whatever catches our attention. I am JT, and I'm here with my co-host,
Mike.
Yes, and we have a very special guest on with us tonight, and we're going to do something a little different than we usually do. I think Brew Crime's done it twice, but I want to make it lucky number 3. Is that right, Mike? That's the right count, right?
For interviews?
Yes.
I think it's 4.
Oh, 4. All right. Well, we passed the 3. Yeah, that's okay. 4's more. I'm not a poet. All right. Our guest's previous book, The War, Hagler Hearns and the Three Rounds for the Ages, was applauded in the Times of London and was chosen by the Progressive magazine as a favorite of 2021. Since 2018, he's also written Berserk, The Shocking Life and Death of Edwin Valero, Slaughter in the Streets, When Boston Became Boxing's Murder Capital, and Fistful of Murder, The Fights and Crimes of Carlos. Oh, see, gonna mess that up. Is it Monzon? I think. Monzone! I'm so glad Don decided to jump in there. We are here with Don Stradley, wonderful author and wonderful human being. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, welcome back. The last time we had you on was episode 35. It was a little while ago. 2020 to be exact.
Well, I'll try to come back every 70 episodes or so.
Sounds good.
That's about all people can handle us for, is really. They need a refresh, just a full reset, and then they'll come back. Well, we are here to talk to Don about his new book, Boston Tabloid, The Killing of Robin Benedict. And having been, both Mike and I were lucky enough to have copies sent to us, and we were able to give it a read, and we really enjoyed it. And, you know, you might have mentioned this, you might have talked to Mike and everyone else about this before, Don, but I kind of, as a semi-writer, depending on who you ask, really,
podcast writer.
Yeah, sure. Can we talk about kind of your background in writing and what got you to this point?
Yeah, sure. I started out like a lot of writers do. I worked for some small town newspapers in Massachusetts, but I didn't really love it. I thought I was going to like it, but it didn't really fit. But then, I got tired of being sent to interview the local shopkeeper or the local fire chief, that kind of thing. That didn't really move me. But then some years went by, and I had an opportunity to write for magazines, mostly sports magazines. And this I liked a lot better. The format was longer, the stories were longer. I was able to sort of pretend I was an investigative journalist. I was able to dive a little deeper into subjects. So magazine writing appealed to me, where newspaper writing really didn't. So I just followed that, and it's a really long and convoluted story. One thing led to another, and I just kept getting opportunities to work for magazines. And some few years ago, some people had read my magazine articles and signed me to a book contract, and that's where all of these books came from over the last few years. And there was always a true crime element in some of the books, and I decided, let's just go full throttle, pick a murder case, and explore it, because some of the past books had been sports meets true crime, and I thought, let's leave the sports out of it. I think it might just be confusing people. They don't know if it's a sports book or a crime book. And I thought, let's leave sports out. Let's just focus on the criminal aspect of it. And that's where the most recent book came from. Boston Tabloid.
I mean, it's probably a good way to, Boston Tabloid. It's probably a good way to do it too, since your history in writing had been in sports, right? So why not tie it in with a little bit of crime too, and then you're not completely out of your element at first.
Yeah, well, when I was doing the other books, you always had the sports element to fall back on. If you if you ran out of things to
Yeah.
say about the crime, you could talk about a couple of fights that happened and kind of weave your story that way. And then when I wrote about Hagler and Hearns, there was no crime. It was just a pure boxing book, sports book, you know.
Yeah.
This one was interesting because it was really the first time I had no sports to fall back on. I just had to focus on, you know, investigations and bloody weapons and dead prostitutes. It was a different, you know, different ball game. And as I found out along the way that I was very comfortable in that milieu.
Yeah, I was noticing that, you know, of course, there was that difference between kind of previous works and this one, and talking about kind of the case that you selected, you know, like what attracted you to this case specifically? Because it is very unique. It's not one that I actually had heard of,
Me
which
neither. Yeah.
is hard to do these days because I've covered a lot of stuff. But what was it?
Okay. When my publisher and I occasionally get together, we go out for dinner, we have a few drinks, and we basically talk about what are we going to do next. And one night over a beer, we started kicking around old cases that we remembered from when we were kids. And I'm a few years older than him, so I wasn't sure he would remember this one, but he did. It was a case that was known at the time in the early 80s as The Professor and the Prostitute. It was a case that in the Boston area in Massachusetts, where he and I lived, it was just a really big event. It was the kind of case that really, you know, haunted the imagination for more than a year. It was in headlines for months and months. And as I detail in the book, it just had that sort of tabloid ring to it, where the newspapers loved it, the radio stations, news stations. It had something for everybody, you know, just the idea that this famous professor from Tufts Medical School had murdered a prostitute. It was a case that it just caught fire. And not just in Boston, but as I noted in the book, it was attracting journalists from all over the country. They were coming up to Boston to you know, learn what they could about it. So it started as a Boston case, became national, so my publisher and I we spent the whole night talking about what we remembered about it, you know, and we just thought, okay, that'll be my next book. And sure enough, it worked out. So that's where it came from.
It's amazing too for a story that isn't a serial killer or something, for it to get that national spotlight is kind of crazy, really. You expect that from the Ted Bundys or all that kind of stuff because it went on for so long. But it, you know, it's awful that this woman was killed, but it's crazy that it became such a huge story.
What I think happens, and I address this a little bit in the book, is that crime coverage kind of changes the way fashions change. There was a period slightly before this crime where Ted Bundy was in the news all the time, and John Wayne Gacy.
Oh, yeah.
And people like that were getting all the headlines. But then it started to change a little bit, and it became more of the suburban, you know, sort of secrets of suburbia type of crimes were starting to get headlines. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of TV shows like Hard Copy, shows like that back in the day that really jumped on this idea of just people behaving badly in the suburbs, you know. And this case came along at that time. So it really was the perfect case for that moment. Shortly after that, then we started getting the sort of celebrity LA type murder cases like the Menendez brothers, things like that, you know, which led up to O.J. Simpson, you know. Then all the cases had to have a celebrity component. So crime coverage.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that became a huge thing.
Yeah, yeah. So crime coverage. The Michael Jackson and all things like that became the big coverage. Because the name was already famous, so you didn't have to work too hard to build up the case,
Right.
But so yeah, crime coverage changes kind of like fashion. And then for a while it was sort of the high school shootings that became the big crime of the moment. And the past few years, I think it's there are still the high school shootings and nightclub shootings and things like that. But now we're in sort of a political time. And most of the
God, yeah.
most of the coverage goes to sort of politically oriented Me Too movement type crimes. Everyone's looking for another Harvey Weinstein type of case. That gets all the coverage now. There could be an awesome crime being committed this week. We may not learn about it because the Weinstein case is still in the news, and that's getting all the the big clicks.
Or a certain thing that happened on January 6th, was it?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that's in the news a lot,
exactly.
right?
So we're in sort of a political era now, and in a couple of years, maybe it's going to change again. Maybe there'll be another Jeffrey Dahmer who gets all the coverage, or maybe it'll be a case like this one with the professor and the prostitute. It ebbs and flows. There have been cases like this one since then that didn't get as much coverage. A lot of it's timing.
Oh, yeah.
I think some of the high school shootings wouldn't get as much coverage if something else had happened that week. I mean, that's a strange thing to say, but a lot of it is what the editors and publishers think will catch the eye that week.
Yeah, media's brutal.
Well, unfortunately, I think that's what a lot of the school shooters thought, too. So I'm kind of glad that it's not making it on TV as much anymore, even though it's horrible that it's happening as much as it is, and something has to change in the culture to get rid of that. But you've seen it just disappear off of the news these days.
Yeah, and in a way, I'm glad because it always creates a copycat a couple of weeks later.
Oh, yeah.
Almost inevitably,
It does.
either in the next state or
does.
a few states away, you'll get another one. It sort of catches on like a
Yeah, especially when guns are just in the closet or in the,
oh yeah
in your bedside table. It's a little easier to get them. Like, it's a little harder to get them in Canada because they've got to be legally locked up in a gun safe and everything, and
right.
the ammo has to be stored somewhere else in the house, and there has to be trigger locks on the weapons at all time. So it doesn't happen as often up here.
Well,
Are you
even
saying that we're a little more blasé?
not as gun crazy, trigger happy as we are down
Different.
here in the States.
Different culture. It's still pretty gun crazy up here, but it's just for hunting.
Yeah, you have
it's-
a lot of hunters up there, that's for sure. But with the copycats,
Yeah.
even with the professor and the prostitute, there were copycats of that crime, and defense attorneys.
Oh God, yeah.
Defense attorneys would start to mine this case for ideas of how to defend their client. It happens everywhere. There are always copycats.
Well, unfortunately, too, sex workers have always been a target because they've always been what is that saying? The less dead or whatever. Like, the police didn't care, a lot of public didn't care because they were sex workers, and that was a bad job to them. So, I mean,
Yeah.
at least that's changing, but they've always been a target of these evil people, be it serial killers, be it someone like this.
Well, that's also that's a big part of the book is that the coverage in
Yeah,
Boston
exactly.
At first was very upset about this young woman. She was only 20 or 21. This young woman had been murdered. Eventually, when it was revealed that she was a prostitute, the story changed. Suddenly, there was a suggestion
Yeah.
that she was somehow a villain in her own story, and that she had
Right.
manipulated this professor, and the press jumped on that, and he jumped on it too. Started portraying himself as this victimized guy who had no choice but to kill her because she had manipulated him and was after his money. And
Yep.
The press and the public bought into that because, like you just said, sex workers have always been easy targets, and the search for her body was, I think, ended prematurely because she was a prostitute.
Yeah. I mean, it's no different than here in Metro Vancouver with Robert Pickton, right?
Oh, yeah.
He got away with it for years and years and years because people just didn't care because they were sex workers on the downtown east side, which is like the poorest neighborhood in Canada. They just didn't give a shit. And it's well known that there was probably at least one or two other serial killers working that area at the same time that have never been caught. Just because that's just what happens, unfortunately. And we need to see it change, but we haven't yet.
That's how they can keep stacking the bodies up.
Yeah.
When you think that a guy like the Green River killer can kill, what was it, 30 or 40 prostitutes? It's not like anybody could kill, 40 housewives or 40 secretaries, and just stack them up.
No, exactly.
But prostitutes are like, shooting pop bottles.
Yeah. And we were talking a little bit about Robin and how kind of she went from what was supposed to be a front page story to kind of like 10th page, I think you had mentioned in your book or around there. And like the way that Robin was kind of introduced and in this case and the way that you had done it, I was like, oh man, because like I was with her and then the more you told us about her, she was controlling and whatnot. And I was like, I don't know. And then I was with her. Like, was that kind of the dynamic you were looking for? Am I thinking too much about this? Or because it was a roller coaster in terms of how I felt. Ultimately, it stinks, right? What happened to her. It shouldn't have. But like just introducing her as a person, I just kind of went on this roller coaster ride.
Well, it's interesting that you mention it that way. I just wanted the whole thing to feel like kind of a whirlwind to give that I wanted that to be the impression you got of the relationship, that it was a roller coaster, that it was probably fun at first, but then there was sort of I think of it as a turf war, a battle for control. The professor thought he was in control because she was a prostitute and all he had to do was put money in her hand.
Right.
But she thought all along that she was smarter than this guy. He was this sort of oafish character that didn't really know how to behave around women. His only opportunity was to go into this red light district and befriend prostitutes. So she thought she was in control. Yeah. He thought he was in control. It was kind of...
And she wasn't even interested in him.
Yeah. And there was some debate over whether he was delusional and he thought maybe he could win her over. I don't think he was delusional. He was a guy who spent a lot of time reading pornography and hanging around in the bars. He knew what a prostitute was all about. But he still thought he could control her. I think the issue with a lot of guys who kill women, it's always an issue of control, and they can't get it, so they eventually they use drugs to get it, they use money to get it, and when that's no longer working, they bring out the gun or the hammer or the knife.
Yeah. I mean, he was trying to do a Pretty Woman before that movie was even out, basically.
Well, and
I had to look what year that movie came out.
Right, 1990. Right. Well, the interesting thing too is that I don't know if you remember, but in some of the notes that were made public between the two of them, there was some kind of a friendship between them. How many prostitutes?
It did seem like
how many prostitutes send birthday cards to their clients, or refer to them as, you're one of my best friends. I'm so happy to see you succeeding at work. That's kind of unusual, I think. So that's something no one has ever wanted to explore, was that maybe at some point they were friendly to a degree. And then she backed off thinking, You can't do that.
I mean, enough money changes hands. I mean, you'll probably be a lot friendlier with your client, but then if your client starts to become problematic, then it's like,
Right.
back
Well,
off,
once
right?
once he lost his job because he was embezzling from Tufts University to
Right.
keep her
That'll do it.
friendship. Once he lost his job, that probably signaled the end of it for her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he was trying to use that to start the relationship, too. A lot of the money was coming from there in general, it seemed like.
Yeah, and I think he wanted to show her that he could be a bad boy. You know, I think that was
Yeah.
part of it too.
Yes, I
Yeah, he
think
was.
so, too.
Well, and Pee Wee Herman hung out in a biker bar, but it didn't work out for him. Like
He got he got to dance on the table, and that was okay.
that's fair. You know what he did? Tequila. We in the beginning, you're kind of talking about how like this case really kind of spread throughout Massachusetts, and then the nation. And I was kind of thinking about like something that was really interesting to me was Douglas and how he seemed. It kind of seems like the theme of like the fall of man, where everybody's really interested in somebody who's right here, and then they just drop. And I was wondering, kind of, because you did a great job depicting what that kind of was like, because he was on an irreversible path of destruction. So, well, to me, anyways, what was that like writing about that?
About his downfall.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it was sort of. I think that was what attracted the public to the story. Uh, because back then and still today, the public enjoys seeing someone fall from grace. They just do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
whether it's an athlete or a politician or a famous actor,
A billionaire.
a billionaire, the public loves to see people fall. And I think they loved hearing about this professor who had been really on the cutting edge of his profession. He was a revered scientist, William Douglas. He was well known around the world, not just in Boston. He was known in Europe for some of his discoveries and some of his experiments. And I think the public was fascinated by his downfall. Um, were you asking if I ever did I feel bad for him, or what? What was your question really pertaining to about writing about his downfall?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I was wondering if it was something that was difficult to write. My brain is just like, well, I just want to say that he fell, but you did a really good job being patient with it. And I was just wondering if that was difficult to be patient with in terms of the narrative.
Well, fortunately, there was so much going on that it just made the story more intriguing to write about, because while he was dealing with this prostitute who no longer wanted anything to do with him, he also had to deal with Tufts University, which was investigating him. So in that regard, JT, I became really fascinated with Douglas, because he was not just against the wall, he was sort of in between two walls as they were crushing him. Um, and he,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the university's coming after him while he's in pursuit of this prostitute. And at the same time, he was still going to the red light district in Boston looking for more prostitutes. The guy was, he really had a one-track mind. So I became fascinated with Douglas during that section of the book. I was fascinated with his childhood and everything else about him. But that particular section, when the heat was really on him, and then he had to get odd jobs. He ended up working at a women's hotel, just trying to make a couple of bucks because he'd been relieved
Right.
of his job at the university.
That's not a great place for him.
He just seemed to pop up in strange places, and while the TV coverage was showing him every night, and the women at the hotel were seeing the guy who had just started working there. There was just a lot of stuff that made the story really fascinating. I think. I loved all these characters in the book too. That was something I was very fortunate that The professor was interesting. The prostitute was interesting. The state troopers to me were interesting. The district attorneys were interesting.
Yes.
Ultimately, Douglas's defense attorney, Tom Troy, was another interesting character. It seemed like everybody was a bit larger than life, which is very helpful when you're writing a book. You know, and a couple of them were still alive, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was able to talk to them, and
Oh wow.
that made it all that much more interesting. I wish a few of them were still alive. I didn't get to talk to some of them, and some of the people were very old now, and they just came right up front and said,
Yeah.
they didn't really remember that much, and they didn't want to talk that much. So there were a few opportunities that I wasn't able to cash in on. But some of the people were alive, and they gave me some great information, which is in the book. Their recollections were really useful.
So in the book, when you mentioned that you add some direct quotes and you say that they said it in 2021, would that be a result of those interviews that you
Right.
had with them?
Right.
Okay. All right. That's
Who
so
were some of the
interesting.
people that you were able to interview? Just for the people listening.
Well, the three key people. One was a state trooper named Paul Landry. He got the call to go investigate this bloody hammer that had been found in a roadside garbage bin. And fortunately, he was still alive, and I
Yeah.
was able to talk to him. And he talked about just it was sort of a hellacious experience where the state troopers were the first ones on the case, but there was a lot of friction between the state troopers and the district attorney's office. The older cops didn't want the state troopers involved because the troopers were not experienced at handling these sort of investigations. So he just talked a lot about that friction that went on. And
Yeah.
I also loved talking to, he was the prosecutor. Let me get the book so I can remember his name. The prosecutor.
While you're looking that up, it's really interesting that they didn't want the state troopers involved in it because I thought Landry actually did some pretty
He
decent
did.
work in terms of what you had brought up.
Yeah, he was a go-getter because he was on the verge of retiring. Because he had some health issues, he was on the verge of retiring.
Right.
But at the last minute, he gets hired or he gets assigned to do this case, and his commander told him, just do it until they take you off. But he became so invested in it. Yeah,
Oh,
he
jeez.
became invested in it, and ended up arguing with the DA's office, and it got a
Right.
little hairy.
Right.
Okay, the district attorney was a fellow named, or the assistant DA was named John Kivlin, and I took a wild Hail Mary shot, and was able to contact him, and he was interesting because talking to him on the phone, he sounded like a real old time New Englander, almost like someone from the Kennedy family. I don't know if that resonates with you in
Oh,
Canada, but
ask not what your country can do.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, that's how it was. He was saying, well, Don, I'm not sure if I can be of much help to you. Uh, it was a long time ago,
Hey, I watch a lot of
I love it.
Movies.
and he ended up talking
I love that.
nonstop for about 45 minutes, and it was beautiful. He had a lot of no one knows where the bodies are buried. This is a case where a lot of things are unknown. There's a bit of mystery in there, and he just kind of
Yeah.
accepts it for what it is. Doesn't get too worked up about it. And then another interesting character was a guy named DeFrucia, who was the attorney for Robin Benedict's family. And I was trying to get as many legal minds to talk to as possible because when people read the book, I go into this in some detail, but Douglas's confession had so many holes in it. It was a confession that I didn't believe it as I was reading it. The state trooper told me he didn't believe it. There were just too many soft spots in it. And so I was asking these attorneys that I spoke to, how common is it for a confession of this nature to just be sort of hammered out quickly, make it sound close enough without really giving out too much detail, and they kind of, shuffle their feet a little bit, and they said, well, yeah, it's not supposed to happen that way, but it does. So I was kind of fascinated that they took this lousy confession and just to end the case. They accepted his confession. They didn't try to connect the dots. They didn't spend much time after he had confessed. I think they were happy to just put him in jail. They gave him a manslaughter charge.
Yeah,
that's a big part of the book too. Just kind of understanding how the legal stuff pans out in a case like this, where they just want to close the book. I was kind of fascinated by that, and I tried to get the legal minds involved to shed a little light. And I don't want to say they were sheepish, but they said it shouldn't happen that way, but it does. Because I think Douglas is...
Yeah, they got their man, but that's all they got.
Yeah. And there were a few deals struck over dinner between the defense attorney and the DA. And I'm convinced that Troy, the defense attorney, sat with Douglas and came up with just enough of a confession. We'll confess to this much, and that should be enough, without really saying too much. I was pretty fascinated by that, partly because I'm less interested in legal stuff than I am in the investigative part. The legal stuff tends to be kind of too much of a spider's web, and it can be really infuriating. Yeah. So I was glad that this case never really went to trial, because that would have made the book, that would have added another 100 pages to the book. And when I read true crime books, that's the part of the book that always sags, is the trial, and partly because it's difficult to write about a trial to make it interesting, because you have a lot of stuff that's just being repeated, that's already been gone over. There's the investigation, then there's a grand jury, then there's a jury trial. And a lot of writers, when they sit down to write a true crime book, they sag in that part of the book. And so I thought to myself, I will not do that. I'm not going to write a book that sags through a trial. And that was another reason that I was attracted. Yeah. I was attracted to this case, because there was no trial. It was just a confession. But one thing I did do was go into the aftermath of what happened to him after he went to prison and when he got out, because that was stuff that's never been written about before with this case. No one knew what happened to him. No one knew if he was still alive or not. I dug up all that information myself, and so if people are into this case and they've always wondered what happened to these guys, what happened to the professor, they'll find out when they read this book, Boston Tabloid, The Killing of Robin Benedict.
Yeah, you got to read the book. Yeah, and you know what? I totally agree there with the court cases, because when I write my podcast episodes, if I'm going to write anything about the court case, it's a quick breeze through, because I personally don't find them interesting unless it's like court dramas can be interesting because they take out all the boring stuff and it's all the hits, right? Like think of I'm a big fan of Michael Connelly's The Lincoln Lawyer books and the TV show, because it's just the hard hitting things. It's not the really boring things that just go on and on, right?
Yeah.
We need somebody to write the trial like a boxing match, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Well, you know,
That's how it has to go.
even when you're writing about boxing, you know, you don't describe every punch, or you know, you kind of have to,
Right.
you have to pick your exciting moments to write about. You know, you don't have to
Yeah.
give people every detail. You know, and even some very good
Yeah.
true crime writers, even they fall into that trap, because I think part of it is they're fascinated just by, oh, I've got the court transcript in my hand. you know if they get a hold of the transcript,
Yeah.
they're so fascinated that they feel they have to
Yeah.
share it, or report it. And it's really not necessary. And I know that I was able to get a hold of Douglas's prison records, so I know how it is to have that thing in your hand, and you fought so hard to get it. You want to
Yeah.
transcribe it. You want to share it. You want to make it part of the book, but you have to let a cooler head prevail, and just give the really key stuff.
Yeah.
And because the prison sent me tons and tons of material that I ended up, it wasn't that interesting. So they send me graphs of his behavior, his good behavior. They keep charts of a criminal's good behavior. They're almost like the report cards that you get in school. They sent me all those.
Kindergarten.
Gosh.
Yeah. Now, some writers would just transcribe every damn report that was written about the guy, but I was like, that would,
Yep.
that
And
would
some
kill
people would
me.
love that.
Yeah. In January, he, got full marks for good behavior,
Yeah.
and I thought, that would kill me if I had
Although
to read it. So I'm not gonna transcribe.
Yeah.
Right.
That is really cool that you got all that stuff, though. Regardless if it would make a good read or not, it's really interesting that you were able to get all of that information from them still.
Well, it's interesting when you try to request prison records. What
I bet.
what they do is they ask you, what do you want to know? So you have to tell them.
Ah, yes.
You have to tell them, well, I want to know about this. I want to know about that, this and that. They will only send you material based on what you want to know. So if it turns out that he did something very, very strange in his cell, but if I didn't ask about it, they won't tell me about it. So they play
Makes sense, yeah.
a little bit of 3-card Monte, which I guess that's understandable. So I had to be very meticulous about what I asked for, because I wanted to know certain things. And the stuff I got was great, and it did inform the final third of the book.
I had to Google it because I didn't even know. And in Canada, you can't request criminal records unless it is you personally that's requesting your own.
Oh, really?
Unless you're a police or...
What about
unless you're, what is it here?
what about a family member?
Federal or provincial police. It sounds like only yourself on my quick Google.
Wow,
So,
that's interesting.
Yeah, privacy acts are very different here.
Yeah. In America, if the criminal has died, you're able to request his records for a lot of reasons, journalism reasons, or family stuff. But you have to produce his death certificate. That's the tricky part. I had to look for death certificates, and had to do a lot of background stuff like that. But that was fun. That was interesting for me.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of times some folks kind of forget, like, you get the end product, but there was a lot of groundwork that went into getting to that final product, not just the writing, but also the research. And it sounds like you did a whole bunch of it.
Well, yeah. It took about a year. I would say it took a year. And it was also interesting that I got to speak to some people who knew Robin. I mean, that
Oh
that was
wow.
in the book too, and that sort of helped inform my portrayal of Robin. Now, unfortunately, Douglas is really the A side of the story. Uh, he always was. The killer is always the A side. The victim is always the B side. Um, unless I suppose Abe Lincoln was more popular than John Wilkes Booth. Uh,
Probably.
but generally, the killer, and Kennedy was probably more popular than Lee Harvey Oswald. But in most cases, the killer is the A side. So I was able to draw a more complete picture of Douglas. Robin, uh, because she did live in the shadows as a prostitute. There's a big gap
Yeah.
in her story where it seemed like she was this clean cut high school kid one year, and then a few years later she's turning tricks. And I tried my best.
Yeah, and purposely. She, like, sex workers in general kind of keep anything personal about them hidden. So their personal life is gone
Yeah,
from the,
yeah,
the record.
yeah. They just keep everybody in the dark, and they move away from their hometown.
Yeah.
And but I was fortunate that I got to speak to a couple of people. One girl in particular who knew Robin pretty well when they were kids, and to me it was just so interesting to hear her description of Robin as just this sweet, quiet girl playing her flute in the high school band and stuff like that. It was. Uh, I think the fact that there is a mystery makes her all the more intriguing.
Yes, 100%. And so, man, I think we hit on a couple of good points. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about with us about your book that we haven't hit on or that you'd like to hit on?
Well, just generally for people who are not familiar with this case, I'll give them a quick rundown. It was in 1983. Um, One afternoon, a guy in Malden, Massachusetts, walked into a police station and said his girlfriend was missing. And it turned out his girlfriend was a prostitute and he was a pimp. And her last client had been a professor from Tufts Medical School. And as the case was investigated, it was learned that the professor and this prostitute had a very uh, entangled relationship that involved embezzling and cocaine and Boston's red light district, which was known as the combat zone. And I'm sure you have a few combat zones up in Canada, these sort of really dense areas where all the prostitutes of a city seem to converge. Um, and the case just really exploded, first in Massachusetts and then nationally. And it was a big case in its day. It created I think it helped kick off what I call the tabloid culture in the United States. Now, granted, there were tabloids long before this, dating back to the first newspapers, back in the 1880s, where they were tabloids. But this particular case, I think, really helps to kick off this notion that every case would be treated as a kind of tabloid story. No matter what you were covering, you covered it like it was a tabloid. I think this
Yeah.
case was really, it was not totally responsible for this new era in the 1980s of tabloid coverage, but it really was at the dawn of a new era in tabloid reporting. Um, and I think one of the things I tried to do with the book was not just explore the crime, but also that era. To me, it's a real fascinating era. Everything was different. The way we got our news was different. And if that case were to happen now and we were reading about it on our smartphones, it may not have the same power. It may not have the same resonance. But back then, when you opened up your paper, and on the front page was a picture of this degenerate professor, his head, taking up an entire front page of a major newspaper, screaming out to you from newspaper kiosks. It was just a different time, and we all knew this professor after a while. We all felt like we know this guy because we were seeing his picture every day. We saw it on the subways.
Yeah.
We saw it just walking around downtown. Your friend was reading the newspaper, and there would be this guy's face. And for a while, it was also Robin Benedict's face that we saw. And I wanted to explore that time period where it wasn't just the crime that was interesting. It was just the way things were covered back then. It was very different. Now you don't get that big picture screaming out at you. You get a little picture on your phone. And it may not hit you between the eyes the way it used to. Now, a crime like this is more likely to be discussed on a podcast for a while. I don't know if it would be discussed.
Yeah.
I don't know if people would still be discussing it a year and a half later. Crimes don't seem to linger that long in the memory, and some of them do. The bigger ones do. But I don't know if a case like this would still be discussed years and years later. It was still being discussed a decade after it happened because in Massachusetts there was a governor running for a re-election who brought it up because there were issues with criminals not serving their entire sentence. And this case...
Yeah, that's a problem.
This case brought back... or it brought into focus the what they call the truth in sentencing law, which was a big deal in the United States back in the 90s, where a guy would be sentenced to 25 years and he'd serve 5 years, leaving a lot of angry people out there wondering, why this man who had killed their daughter did less time than if he had, robbed a gas station.
Yeah.
This case brought that back into the spotlight 10 years after it happened. So, yeah, it was just a different time. People discussed crimes in a different way than they do now. So I think that will be interesting for younger readers. If they pick up this book, they'll be interested. And older readers will I hope, recall that era fondly, thinking, boy, they remember when they saw this case in the news. I've heard that from a lot of readers who have contacted me saying that I was bringing back a lot of memories of that time period, and that was sort of the goal.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. No, and I mean, as somebody who really kind of needed to hear about that time, I mean, it was quite interesting. It was quite, it was not, I mean, it was thrilling to hear about that kind of thing and how the coverage was taken care of.
What you're saying, JT, is for someone who wasn't born yet.
I don't want to talk about it. We don't talk about that, Mike. We don't talk about it. Jeez Louise. Don't call me out.
Yeah. Well, hey, I was very young. What year? It was 83, right?
Yeah, 83, yeah.
So I was 1, so it's okay.
Well, it's funny. History works in such a strange way. People who were around then remember it so vividly. But anyone who was just that... Maybe if they missed it by a year, they don't remember it at all. It's funny the way that happens, and
yeah, I believe it.
Almost like the window closes and it's forgotten. So that was another reason I wanted to write about it, was to bring it back and remind people that it was quite a big deal. And it's so funny to think that things that are so big this year, that seem so big to us, 20 years from now, no one's going to care about them. They're going to forget about them so quickly, maybe even quicker than people forgot this case.
It kind of reminds me of, like, here growing up. I remember a case of this kid, Jesse Cadman, being murdered over a baseball cap.
Mm-hmm.
I can find almost no information about it today. I'd love to cover it one day, but I can't find information about it. Even though, like, after he was murdered, his dad became a politician, just a long-haired hippie musician that had no interest in politics, got into politics to try to change the laws.
Mm-hmm.
There should be more information about it, but it's been forgotten.
Wow. Do you remember what kind of baseball cap it was?
I don't remember. It was probably some sports team. Like, this is in the sort of, I think, mid-90s, so the baseball cap wasn't as, like, center of everything as it is today. Like, everyone wears friggin' baseball caps now, but it wasn't as much of a religion, I'd say, as it is nowadays.
I remember when kids used to kill each other over, like Michael Jordan sneakers. I remember that period of time.
Oh, God.
The gangs would get into wars over a pair of shoes. The history is funny, and that's something I've encountered in trying to publicize this book. If my publisher and I, if we mention it to somebody, they either have a vivid memory about this case and they're fascinated and they're so glad that we did this, or they just draw a blank. They have no idea, no memory, and I encountered the same thing, covering boxing and sports, other sports. If something happened, but sort of before somebody was born, they not only don't know about it, they don't really give a damn about it. There's a lot of that happens. But I wanted to bring this case back into the spotlight one last time. I thought it deserved one last sort of a victory lap.
Absolutely.
I'm in total agreement of that.
There were a couple of books written about it in the past, but they ended in 1984. They were good
way
books.
too early.
Yeah, they ended with his confession, and they took his confession as gospel. And I thought, when I write mine, I'll tip my hat to those previous books, but I'm going to go a little deeper, and not going to end it in 1984. I'm going to follow it to to the end, the bitter, bloody end.
Yeah, exactly. Expand a little bit.
Yeah.
Well,
I was just going to ask, do you have any plans for another book in the future here now that this one is out and in the public eye?
Yeah, I've already started working on book number 6. Ooh. And I'm not giving anything away. I'm going to keep it under wraps. But it's another crime book, and it's I think it's going to be a good one. I'm pretty happy about it, and I already have some interest from an agent, so we're moving forward with another one. Yeah.
Is it in the same city there, Boston, or can you give that much away? Or
well, there's some Boston in it. But I get out of Boston too. It's all over.
Oh, okay.
All over the Eastern Seaboard.
Okay. Is this going to be with Hamilcar again, or
probably not?
Oh, really?
I'm moving into a different kind of situation.
Okay.
Hamilcar is great. I'll probably do more stuff. For Hamilcar in the future. But I think the next one is going to be for a different publisher.
Okay, nice.
Listen, before we go, where can everybody find info about you, about your book, or books, rather?
And any other writing you do, too.
You can go right to Amazon and find the books. You just look up Boston Tabloid on Amazon, and it'll bring you right to the book, and then you can learn all about me. We've gotten some really good reviews for this book, too. Good press from, like library journals and things like that. So there have been some kind reviews that I'm happy to hear about. So yeah, just get on Amazon and you'll find it.
And I'm pretty sure you're in more actual physical bookstores too. not just Amazon, right?
Well, this book has been doing pretty well in bookstores naturally around Massachusetts. It's actually been selling out in bookstores in Massachusetts,
Wow. Congrats.
which is great news to hear. I love that when they're reordering. I heard one store in Boston reordered 8 copies, and to me that's a window display. You can do
Right.
you can do a pyramid of books that way. Like I'm Tom Clancy, but yeah. So yeah, it's in bookstores. We have a good distributor, so they get the book in Barnes and Noble, places like that. I wouldn't want to send anyone on a wild goose chase to a bookstore, but it is in certain select bookstores in Massachusetts, and I'm sure across the country. It's like the case itself. It's slowly spreading across the country.
Well, I just Googled it here. In Chapters Indigo in Canada, it is available online from their online store. Not in stores currently, but you can definitely buy that online. Your book, The War, is in stores and online.
Yay,
So, yeah,
Canada.
most of them are available online at least on their web store. So yeah.
Yeah. Or they can go to the publisher's website, Hamilcar.
Yes.
HAMILCAR. They can go to Hamilcar Publishing and get on the website, and they can buy my books, and they can buy we have many other fine authors. They've been publishing books. They just published a new one about Jim Morrison of the Doors, and a couple of books on hip hop, and they started out doing boxing books, but they're branching out into all kinds of areas. So yeah, explore the Hamilcar website and support them too. They do a great job.
We've interviewed Patrick Connor and Jimmy Tobin as well.
Okay.
So yeah, check out the books on there as well.
Good. Excellent. Yeah, good guys. A lot of good people working at Hamilcar.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been great chatting with you and them. It's always nice to learn about, especially when I was learning about boxing and crime together, because I know very little about boxing. So it was nice to kind of learn that from someone who knows the actual sport.
Well, boxing and crime, they go together. They go together real well.
They sure do.
It's
Starting to get that feeling.
It's been,
yeah.
It's been ingrained, and it's a sport that has attracted a lot of bad guys. Put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Vancouver has a boxing gym that's tied in with restaurants and breweries and stuff that they've basically been able to make those community engagements because they ban all gang affiliation. Because it's just it's a big thing in the boxing scene, right?
Well, it's
just
because the sport is generally in urban areas. That's where a lot of the fighters come from, and that's also where a lot of the gangsters are.
Same with that gym,
yeah. 100 years to the time of Al Capone and gangsters have always been around the boxers, and they rub elbows, and some periods are worse than others.
Although the gangsters here are really confused because most of them are in the suburbs and wealthy suburbs, and it doesn't make sense really, but that's a different story.
Wow. Well, I keep expecting, because there are so many boxers from Eastern Bloc type countries, and boxers from Ukraine, boxers from Russia. I keep wondering when the Russian mob is going to somehow be involved with one of their boxers. I keep waiting for that shoe to drop.
Or have they already?
Publicly, yeah, they already are, I'm sure.
I think there was a guy in MMA, in mixed martial arts, who had a Russian background, and it turned out he was somehow involved with some Russian drug lord, but the story didn't really get too big. The story didn't get too big. one
It just
day's
didn't get
worth
to the West.
one day's worth of headlines, and that was about it.
All right. Well, where can everyone find you online?
Well, they can follow me on Twitter if they want. I don't do as much social media as I used to. I'm kind of burned out.
Good for you.
Burned out on the social media. I'll promote my books, or if I write an article, I might promote it on Twitter. But if somebody just wants to follow me because they like the book, they can find me at Don Stradley, Twitter, whatever.
Yeah, that's what it is. At Don Stradley on Twitter. Yeah, as long as Twitter exists, we'll see what happens there.
I'm not the sort of guy who gets involved in long Twitter conversations. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe I'd get more followers and more book buyers. I don't know. I'm just not that crazy about sharing tiny bits of information on Twitter. It's just not that amusing to me.
Probably should wrap this up. Thank you so much, Don, for coming on. We've had a great time. Really, really enjoyed your book, and I hope everyone will go out and buy it or read it on Kindle or whatever way you can get a hold of the book. And thanks so much.
Yeah, we will even offer an audiobook down the road. That's still being ironed out, but it will be available in the new year as an audiobook.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll talk soon, I hope.
All right. Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it. Good night, everybody.
Our pleasure. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you'd like to find us on social media, go to Brew Crime on all social media platforms. We have a Brew Crime the group on Facebook. If you want to send us a message, you can email us at brewcrime@pacificbeerchat.com. And a shout out to our Patreon supporters. If you'd like to support us, you get one bonus episode a month, and you get ad-free early access to all of our episodes. So you can go to patreon.com/brewcrime. So shout out to our Patreon supporters, True Crime Nana, 3 Beers In Podcast, and the Faves of Our Lives. All cases on Brew Crime are written by Mike and JT or a writer we credit on the episode, and sources are put into our show notes for each episode. We always want to give credit to the people that research the cases we talk about. Check out our store at tpublic.com/stores/brew-crime-podcast, where you can purchase gear like t-shirts, phone cases, stickers, pillows, and all kinds of other cool stuff. Brew Crime's intro was created by Mike using Creative Commons Attribution licensed audio from purple-planet.com, soundbible.com, and freesoundeffects.com. Logo designed by Ben Greenberg. Thanks for listening to this episode of Brew Crime Podcast.